Hello, everybody. It's Martin Kiernan here, and welcome to the first podcast of 2023. We're going to be talking about surgical site surveillance today, so I'm delighted that I've got two real experts to chat this over with, which is Professor Judith Tanner from Nottingham and Melissa Rochon, who's now the new trust-wide surveillance and innovation lead for Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Trust, which is as Melissa's just been telling me, a John Otter initiative. So they have a surveillance and innovation directorate now. So that's going to be very exciting. So now, you two have had a long history in surgical site infection and surveillance. What's the difficulty with getting good data to start with? Because I know back in the day when I was an orthopedic nurse, you were in for 14 days till your stitches came out if you had a hip replacement. And these days I'm reading people going home on the same day. So that's a challenge, isn't it?
So I think the first challenge really is to offer an prospective initiative. So you're following the UKHSA recommendations in terms of their protocol, so that you have that reliable and robust data. For us, I think one of the main barriers has been within the post-discharge surveillance space. And we know with shortening sort of inpatient stays, as you've just alluded to, but also the pressures now on staff to, drive the efficiencies, reduce the waiting lists. This issue is really compounded. Judith, what do you think in terms of barriers to surveillance programs?
Oh, absolutely. We're doing some interviews just now, actually. And when we're speaking with staff, we say, what are the barriers? And it's always the same thing comes up. It's resources, it's staff, and it's time. So, and we don't have, we can't provide more staff and we can't provide more time. So it's about better ways of working, really, and coming up with solutions for doing the process of surveillance differently, which kind of ties in very nicely to a product that Melissa and I that have been working on, mainly led by Melissa and a team of AI specialists. Melissa, I don't know if you want to talk about that, or
before you jump in. Before you jump in on that, do you think when people say, "Hey, great, we can get through patients very quickly and we can shorten the length of stay," what would the impact of that be on our current surveillance system? Or does that just say, right, let's get them out quickly and you can sort out the surveillance later? Do you think that's ever factored into when people change practice?
I think that the focus on safe early discharges provides a really exciting opportunity, actually, for surgical site surveillance in particular. And the reason why I say this is out of not only sort of the work we're doing in the UK, but a government-led initiative to look at surveillance in the States, where they're considering how can we get, this data for public health goals or priorities alongside of directly improving patient care? And I think that remote surgical wound monitoring is a fantastic example, actually, of how you can support safe early discharges.
Yeah, because at the moment, post-discharge surveillance is, how really would you do it in the world at the moment? Questionnaires you don't get back. People, you have different people reviewing the wounds all the time. So there's not how robust actually is PDS at the moment?
Well, indeed, I think that COVID, post-pandemic has sort of cancelled a lot of the face-to-face follow-up. So you're looking at huge swathes of the methodology being removed from practical processes. And two, like you've said, I don't think that the traditional postal route is particularly reliable. It never was when actually post was in fashion. And now we're seeing, the decline of questionnaires at 30 days. But, working with Judith, and I think one of the things that she said to me really early on that resonated with me is there wasn't an opportunity to improve patient care if you're just looking at the retrospective 30 days. And I think that we don't have the indulgence any longer of spending money on, the staff and the resources necessary for post-discharge surveillance unless it actually contributes to improving patient outcomes.
Okay. So tell me about the project then.
Would love to. So this was an initiative that followed our work about using wound images or photographs early on in improving the patient information, so their information needs, with the photo at discharge. About 2020, so just when COVID was really picking off, we had decided to step into using a platform that would allow us to not just use images and information within the hospital setting, but to extend that to when patients went home. So the platform we're using is Isla. The way we went about it was through an initiative with King's, as well as Guy's and Tom's, and what was separate at that time, Royal Brompton and Harefield. And we also had a satellite partnership with Liverpool at the time as well. So together, these multiple centres across the adult as well as pediatric services first decided to ask patients what they would like. So just getting bedsides, finding out what would work. Did patients want to submit to a portal? Would it be useful for us to do a telephone follow-up or the postal route or something that would be an app or using text technology? And actually, telephone was the patient preference by patient in care because there are parents involved. And that was because they wanted to be able to ask questions. However, using a text method was sort of the next best. And if we could take the best of both worlds, because telephone, again, can be quite laborious, as you know, you need to call repeatedly and can be quite lengthy discussions with patients. So we thought, well, text technology, because it's been around for the last 40 years, people like that. They don't have to install anything or download or register. So together with our centres, we launched a pilot period using Isla to see how we would get on and gave the platform our know-how when it comes to things like photo at discharge, our know-how that we've inherited from studies like the TWIST study by McLean et al., where they were saying, really, you want to have some branching questions as well. And we found that the uptake was quite exciting across the different patient groups. To date, I think we have about almost 7,000 unique patients that have used the system. And across our multiple sites, the response rates, I was sort of at pains to say when we published, our response rates of 87% uptake were among the lowest of the partner sites. So it's gone very, very well.
Yeah, I mean, 87 you would consider to be pretty good anyway. And so if that's the lowest, that's quite impressive, really. So, I mean, the system, they use text messages? They text photographs in, or do they go through an app, or does it go through a portal, or how does it actually work in practice? I've had a coronary artery bypass graft at your hospital. I've survived that bit. I've gone home. How does it work for me?
Okay, so we have two approaches. You might have a photo at discharge. So the nurse, before you leave, takes the picture, does a bespoke assessment. And with that, an automatic schedule is set. You'll have seen how the platform works with the nurse. And we receive sort of scheduled automated requests that asks you through a text link to confirm who you are and to consent to the process, and then to provide images and information on your wound healing. It's, as I mentioned, a very low friction sort of engagement, because we know patients, they're usually acute, right? So it's a temporary, they don't want to download or install anything. And you can also bulk upload. So say you're doing, like as we are, using Isla in C-sections. Well, the length of stay is incredibly short. You're not going to get a picture because the wound is covered. And in those cases, we just do bulk uploads. The schedule is set. The patients receive the requests and submit that way. Okay. So all in all, quite straightforward, I'd like to think.
Yeah, because I was wondering then, if it's texts, often a text photograph would cost the patient something, whereas if it was an app, then that wouldn't cost anything. I do apologise, the poodle's just fired off because somebody's turned up at the door.
Not to worry. Well, just on that, it's a progressive web application, which means that the user experiences it through a browser-based approach. So they can answer these requests via email, on their PC, on the tablet, or on a phone. They can also install Isla, or clinicians too can install it so it behaves like a native app also. So it's not just a text as in that respect. It is like an app, but it doesn't require the installation, the registration, etc., which we know is a barrier to patient uptake.
Okay. I mean, you had great uptake. And you showed that some people either didn't want to do it or they weren't very tech savvy. Would there be an opportunity for a relative of a patient to upload for them? You know, just to increase uptake. I mean, my mother was 95 and was still WhatsApping and doing daily Wordles until about a week before she passed. So she would have been very tech savvy, but a lot of people of 65 and in my age aren't that tech savvy. But if you had family who would say, yeah, so I'll upload that for you, would there be some opportunity for other people to be able to do it, or would it have to be patient specific?
Absolutely. You can nominate an alternate, like a relative, to do that. And that's what we do in the case of pediatrics anyway, where we're nominating the parent to be the responder. So yes, you can do. And a lot of patients do take advantage of that. They find it a lot easier. And this is, I think, an interesting, Judith mentioned a bit of work that's ongoing at the moment about finding out more about patient preferences. Judith, do you want to say a bit about that? Just how patients would like to engage with surveillance?
Oh, well, I was just going to pick up and say that I think when you're discharging the patients, Melissa, what you're doing is not just speaking to the patient, but you're also often speaking to the family member at that point at discharge. So you're getting there. So you were talking about patients who, perhaps they're older, it might be there's language issues in terms of different languages spoken. It could be, the location of their wound. It might be somewhere, on the back of your head and you're not able to get a photograph. So I think that when you're using Isla, it's the team, it's the family team or the patient and their team rather than just the patient. Because when we do speak with patients, a lot of them are talking about, oh, my son comes and he helps me do this and I got him to take the photograph. And so absolutely there is involvement of the family in terms of collecting images. Absolutely. And Melissa, I've forgotten what you asked.
Oh, no, just on on the other research that we're involved with in order to find out more about patient barriers to participating, or what they're interested or how they'd like to provide information. Just that work, if you wanted to comment.
Oh, yeah. So Melissa and I are involved in another study, which is called Target Wound Infection. And part of that, we've been looking at how can we improve engagement with surveillance, from a patient's perspective and also from a staff perspective. And when we've been speaking with patients, they have been saying, yes, they're happy to get involved. They like the idea of the remote surveillance. Ideally, what they're interested in is about support and a contact with the hospital and being able to have somebody that they can ask questions about, because often they're anxious. I mean, what was really interesting with the study that's just been published in the Journal of Hospital Infection is we looked at the numbers of pictures and images that people sent, and the highest over let's say it was a 20-day period, I think was 33. So we've got one patient who's 33 times
that's
sending in a photo.
That's time-lapse photography, isn't
it? So they want, a lot of reassurance, and it's quick. It's very quick to respond to these images. I think when we looked at the length of time for clinicians, it's like about 45 minutes.
That was spectacular. I read that in the paper. 45 minutes before you get a response if there was anything slightly concerning. And so that's really good.
Absolutely, because for a patient who's anxious and debating, do I contact my GP? Do I want to bother the GP? I'm not going to be able to see the GP. To be able to send off a picture and get a response back in 45 minutes, absolutely. It's just what a fantastic patient engagement in terms of patient satisfaction. Brilliant. And we're able to pick up, emerging, developing wound issue problems quickly, really quickly. And then we can nip it in the head, nip it in the bud and, prevent problems from getting worse.
I mean, you wonder how much GP time that would have saved, to be honest, because some of these patients may well have been trying to get appointments with GPs, sitting on the phone for ages. And I have to say, that was one of the most staggering things, was to get a response within 45 minutes. So, I mean, is that a medic or is that a nurse? Is that a doctor or a nurse who would do the response?
So it depends which site. I mentioned we're working across a number of different sites, so we have different models. In the paper, we were referring to our surveillance team who were monitoring the platform, engaging with the multidisciplinary team, usually the consultant directly, and taking sort of, next steps if needed. At other centers, it's the tissue viability nursing team, for instance, at Liverpool, right. At St. Thomas. They're using their advanced nurse practitioners who are running a terrific service. And I think in pediatrics and King's, they're using staff nurses to cover the surveillance program. So it really depends on which model you like. We were very keen within our setting to make sure the surveillance team understood what is the work burden involved here. It is a new and increasing workload.
Yeah.
But I think that there are some rewards to that for the patient. Absolutely. We've looked at, how many face-to-face visits we've been able to prevent in snapshots, and it's really terrific the time released in terms of face-to-face. And
trying to work out cost effectiveness is a key thing, isn't it? If you're going to sell it to somebody,
it is.
I remember Judith years ago got a huge program funded by our chief exec because they were so impressed with the actual surveillance program. They put it in a small way, and you'd have to do something similar. I mean, you're actually able to quantify the amount of time taken by this system compared with your traditional system of either phone calls or letters, and getting the better return rate is obviously a better bang for your buck as well.
So that's a piece of work that was published in the Nursing Times by our colleague Julie Trier, who is in Liverpool. She actually looked at the advantage of having the images and the engagement on the platform versus a telephone follow-up, and unsurprisingly, much quicker, which we mention in our paper too. If you have that, I think it's important as well to consider this is something where you can actually charge there is a commissioning service that's looking to, if you're performing a telephone follow-up, and not just because the patient contacts you, we mean because you're worried about the wound and you're going to contact the patient, there is a modest revenue stream attached to that too.
Okay.
We just need to make sure that surveillance links into that clicks into that.
Another cost issue, Martin, which we haven't talked on, and one that's going to get increasingly important, is the carbon footprint.
Oh yeah, that was an interesting point of the paper.
Yeah, and we've got a small aspect on that in the paper that was just published. I've not seen many other studies that talk about the carbon footprint. So, Melissa, you've got more details on this because it was you that was collecting the data on this bit.
So a shout out to Rose Gallagher, who kindly, from the RCN, who kindly pointed me in the direction of that incredibly useful tool. And I think it is interesting to consider the impact on the environment when you're looking at readmissions or even, remote wound care for these patients. What I was surprised about, and I did think that our reoperation rate was in step with other reported sources, but I was really surprised to see the impact that would have in terms of carbon emissions, much higher than the original surgery. So that's something as well to consider when you're talking about a sustainability program within your trust or organization.
I mean, this relies on somebody looking at it and thinking that's a wound infection. So do you have specific criteria to say that this means that? And would there be any opportunity in the future, do you think, for artificial intelligence to actually analyze a photograph? I mean, I know that's tricky, but could AI pick up on something and then flag that to somebody else? So you're even automating the surveillance. What's the opportunity for that, do you think?
So I'll tackle the first bit, and then I'll ask Judith to go on and mention in brief what we can on the question around computer vision and artificial intelligence. So just on the first bit, I think that one of the things that I found really surprising in the piece of work we've recently published is the number of infections that would have been reported and recorded by the surveillance program as SSIs when actually they were adjunct wounds, which of course are important, like drain sites or groin wounds, but wouldn't have been collected. So there's a real drive to improve the accuracy of the data just by having that visual element. We do use the UKHSA criteria for post-discharge surveillance to record an SSI. So, they have sort of 3 criteria there. But I think it's really important for us to capture information on delayed wound healing, or as this early identification. So even though a dehisced wound or gaping or opening wouldn't be recorded as an SSI if the patient didn't have, two additional signs or symptoms. For us, it's really important that we action that. So about your question of do we have a sort of roadmap to what we do and when we do it? Yes, we have a standard operating procedure. we do look at just SSI criteria, but also different issues for patients that might need referral or follow-up, like delayed wound healing, or, whether it's just practical advice or referral to the GP for certain elements. Judith, did you want to just say a bit about what we can in terms of Martin's question on AI?
So absolutely, Martin. AI is a perfect solution for this digital monitoring scenario. Because remember, we came back, we said earlier that it was about staff time and it's about new ways of working. So if we have some AI element to this, then hopefully we can reduce staff time and it's a new way of working. So absolutely, yes, there's AI component would fit in perfectly with this.
We have published on using AI in improving image quality from patients or clinicians. So we are working in this space already and have some work out on just the feasibility of using AI in this space. So quite exciting.
Okay. Do you think there's any opportunity to build this into a whole patient pathway app where somebody is referred for surgery and so they download an app and it gives them some helpful advice, like maybe you're way off, so if you're having a hip replaced on the NHS at the moment, you could actually go on a diet and lose half your body weight. It's going to take that long. But, to give you advice along certain parts of the pathway, maybe give up smoking a few weeks before, or even completely in the few days before you should do this. Please don't shave your own leg the day before. If your organization wants them to chlorhexidine bathe or bathe the day before, just as a prompt to actually get them to do it before they come in, and then what to expect afterwards, culminating in photographs. So they're actually actively engaged in their own care. Do you think there's potential for that sort of thing in the future?
Yeah, I've already seen at least one, or I'm involved with one, creating one of those with a team from Japan. So that currently exists and it's all automated and it's whizzy and IT heavy. It's really interesting. But absolutely, yes, having a system that goes all the way through, because in the NHS, we have a lot of problems with systems. We've got so many systems, so many different databases, and they don't talk to each other, and trying to collect data, trying to extract data, with surveillance, trying to extract data from all these different systems and implement it or upload it to the UKHSA database. It is so time consuming. So if we did have, a much more streamlined patient pathway that went all the way from pre-admission all the way through to post-start would be absolutely perfect. And there are some apps already out there. Some do specific for pre-op. We've got things like ILA, which are looking at post-discharge. So there are lots of things out there. It's about if we can get something that brings it all together, it'd be fantastic.
I'd love to just add to that also. I think where we've really gained traction in this space is we've purposely kept it straight, like simple. We're solving a problem, not all problems, if you like. Mm-hmm. We know that with ILA, we can send patients videos on how to change their dressing. We can add forms. We can do the text prompts on, 2 days before surgery, please start your antimicrobial wash. This is all possible. But I think that we were really keen to demonstrate. We know a lot of IT solutions struggle to actually deliver on what they want to, and even more fail to sort of sustain over time. So for us, it really was about, let's just do the proof of concepts that we can use this, that it's meaningful for patients and clinicians. And then look to how can we develop something that is transferable. So, as Judith mentions, lots of different systems, lots of different apps, etc. But if you develop a module within ILA where we're really concerned about the wound, focusing on that module can be placed in any other solution. We can just be the go-to guys of here, we'll cover the wound part for you. Which I feel is quite powerful.
Okay. Do you think you picked up more infections by doing this route, or do you just think you picked up a wider range of complications? Because to me, it seems like it's a bit like the Americans have done with their ventilator-associated pneumonia surveillance, they now pick up ventilator-associated events, which is a broader category, but there's still all complications of a procedure which people might want to know about. So the fact that you're picking up drain infections and that sort of stuff, you'd say it's not strictly speaking an SSI related to the wound, but it is a complication which could have impact. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think we're very much in step with the National Wound Strategy or National Wound Care. So I'm going to get the whole wording wrong. The National Wound Care Strategy programs sort of emphasis that, wound complication following surgery. We need to learn more about that because there is a burden on the healthcare system and the patient, more importantly. So let's find out more there. And I think that that's incredibly exciting too, because as far as I know, there hasn't been much published on surveillance programs looking specifically at surgical wound dehiscence as an example, which there is some drive to collect that information on, because ultimately there is a comparable cost in some cases, although not the same concern in terms of, your antimicrobial resistance and the like. Still quite important information.
Yeah, and another thing I picked up on is some of the cases actually didn't need antibiotics, whereas if they'd have gone down a different route, they may well have got antibiotics. So there's a potential that you've actually reduced antibiotic use through this system as well.
Yes, there's been a scenario-based study out of the States that suggests that the addition of an image can actually reduce the risk of overtreatment, which is something we'd love to learn more about next step. Yeah.
Okay, and can I ask you, what's been the reaction of the doctors, the surgeons, to this system? Because it's going to be a bit different for them. Do they get to see photographs if things aren't going well, or do they get contacted more often? And are they feeling positive about that or negative?
So I think there were two camps. Some were concerned that this would open the door to more referrals back to the hospital, that where's the infrastructure to cope with the additional work that we'd be bringing back. We didn't find that. We found actually we were able to really help streamline the process for patients. So when they did come back to us, it was a very meaningful encounter. But I would say most surgeons have been delighted, and it's not uncommon for me to hear, I'd much rather have the picture, the sort of overview provided. It saves me so much time. It's very quick. Love this. This is a way to do things.
Okay.
So for them, they've found it's been a terrific addition. I think I wouldn't be wrong, and I think it speaks to the spread that we've seen at the different centers, where we've had the surgeons really engaged in helping drive, at least in the cardiac space, a lot of the uptake for the program.
Okay.
I did an interview yesterday with one of the sites where they're using Isla, and I asked the same question to the surveillance lead nurse there, and she said absolutely the surgeons love it, and for two reasons.
They don't have to talk to anyone.
She said they love it because it's techie. The tech, the gadget, they love that. And they said they can see the pictures. And she said that they'd had issues before around engaging with the surgeons, and the surgeons kind of not quite believing their, the infection data that the surveillance staff were coming up with. But she said with this, the surgeons can see the picture. They go, yeah, okay, it's an infection. So she said that, the engagement and the buy-in was better, but they absolutely love the tech gadget aspect of it as well.
So surgeons love it. Patients seem to like it because you've got a great response rate. Your surveillance teams seem to like it. Are there any downsides to this at all? Because I'm not hearing any.
I think it comes back to how can we ensure that this program doesn't become a silo on other strategies, looking at, as you've mentioned, pre or post-discharge periods, but also in hospital. So we've got the in-hospital section covered, we've got the post-discharge, but we would like to make sure that we're in keeping with other IT strategies. So that is a challenge. I think that the run to the tech space in itself, provides a challenge, because you'll hear, oh yeah, apps, and it's, it's been there, done that for many people. It didn't work the first time, and if you say, oh, it's a progressive web application, although Google is champion progressive web apps, people aren't really sure what that means, and they say, oh yes, no, not for us. So I think there's more work to do. I would love to see more cardiac centers coming on board, because I think it's really powerful if you get a number of centers, and then the learning from the post-discharge surveillance and answering the questions like the ones you've asked us, Martin. That's what we need. We need research in this study. We need people using it and learning more and finding out, it seems, it's a bit of a success story now. Let's see where it goes in future.
Yeah, it really does sound like, and not restricted just to cardiac either. Judith?
One thing we're hoping to do some more work on, Martin, is underserved groups. So patients, for example, if they live in remote areas or where they don't have internet access, Wi-Fi access, those patients, are they going to be disadvantaged? Are they not going to be able to take part? So we're going to have a look at that and see what we can do to maximise engagement for all patients.
Presumably people do go within range of mobile signal occasionally. So as long as they've taken the photograph at the right time and it just uploads when they pick up a signal, I suppose that.
Yeah. So, but we're going to have to do some work around that to see what's what the story is, what's happening there. But I think we have to remember that for patients that you can't get access to, there's still the phone calls that you can always fall back on. Obviously that's labor intensive, but if we want to reach everybody, but at the moment we don't reach everybody, but we're certainly with Isla we're going to get more. So that's something we need to continue to look at.
Okay, well, thanks very much. It's absolutely fascinating. I mean, I could see this being rolled out for all sorts of forms of surgery. Why not? Because length of stay is now hours rather than days. So unless you've got an incredibly comprehensive surveillance system that you're ringing people up all the time or relying on the post, which is not reliable anyway, and that doesn't include photographs, this is just instant. And it's, the response time of 45 minutes is staggering, really. And no wonder people like that. And I'd love to know how much time you could even estimate that's saved from GPs and people. I mean, you're actually getting a response quicker than you would actually get through to the GP ringing up to make an appointment, let alone anything else. So
yes, there's something to that, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. Any final points, guys?
So from our side, I would be really keen to invite colleagues to get in contact with us after, either through this podcast or through the journal articles, pick up our details, because it is a new area and it would be terrific to work with others.
Lovely.
Judith?
No, absolutely second that, Melissa.
Okay, well, in that case, thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this one. First one of the year. Looking forward to talking to you again, no doubt, over the next period, because I think we're going to be seeing a lot more increased interest in surgical site infection. So thanks very much for joining me, both of you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Martin.
And everybody else will catch you again on the next podcast. Thanks very much.